So I just finished reading The Mirror Empire by Kameron Hurley. I really enjoyed it. I'm really excited about it, and I got nothing else going on today, so I thought I would just immediately go into a review. So this book is it's like a parallel universe fantasy novel. Um, it does some really interesting stuff in the world building with gender, like fluidity of gender, and also like different ideas of how different societies could understand gender and um, like different ideas of like matriarchal societies and patriarchal societies. A lot of that stuff going on in the world building for this. Um, as I said, parallel universes and some interesting ways of handling how people cross over between parallel universes, and also a pretty interesting magic system. So if any of that sounds interesting, stick around to hear more of my thoughts. I am going to, just in order to talk about how the magic system and the different universes work, I'm going to have to slightly spoil some like major plot points from like the first 100 pages of this 500 or 600 page book. Um, I mean, none of that is stuff that wouldn't be spoiled if you just read like a synopsis online, or even some of it is on the back of the book. And again, we're talking like the first 100 pages of a 600 page book. So hopefully that's not a big deal. If that is a big deal for you, unfortunately, you're gonna have to just go read it. But yeah, it's stuff that I'll have to talk about in order to really review the book. So um, we we have several different POV characters, and I wouldn't say that one of them is the main character more than any of the others. So that's interesting. Um, I mean, maybe that's not so unique for like a big high fantasy novel. I feel like a lot of fantasy novels do that, but I don't know. I not everybody does, and I do like it. Um, and most of our characters come from different cultures in this setting. So I think before I get into like the plot or even the magic stuff, I think I'll just talk about the setting and the cultures. So we've got this map up front, which I always love when there's a map. Um, the map doesn't show like everything that happens in the book, because there's one plot line that takes place on this big other continent that's like up here. We just have like the little tip of it where like the boat lands, and then there's like lots of stuff going on up here. And then there's mentions of these other countries that are down here, kind of covered up by these symbols on the map. I think the second and third book in the trilogy have the southern half of this continent, so you see more of those other two countries. But most of their action takes place in this part of the map over here. That's where most of the book takes place. So we have these two main cultures on this continent, Dorina, Dorinah, and then we have the Dai, Dhai. Um, and both of these cultures are sort of matriarchal. But it's interesting because they're very different though. The other continent to the north, Sidouan, is patriarchal, and it's very feels kind of reminiscent of like ancient or medieval China, or maybe mixed with a little bit of medieval Europe, but it's like very what you come to expect from fantasy, a very patriarchal society. But this other continent down here, where most of the book takes place, has two different countries that are matriarchal. Um, so the Dhai, the Dai culture is matriarchal, just like by convention and by like their culture. They put slightly more value on um well, okay, so the interesting thing though is that the actual gender identity of people in Dai culture is sort of fluid, but their like sort of matriarchal values are tied to biological sex. And for like succession of rulers, it's preferred that the ruler be capable of bearing children, has a womb, is what we would call biologically female. Um, but one of our main POV characters is does not have a womb, has male genitalia. Um, he does identify as male, but like I said, the gender identities are a little bit fluid. But anyways, he's a male character who ascends to a throne. Just because he's the closest kin, and that's like not conventional in this culture, but that is allowed to happen when it happens, just if that's how the succession works out. But just like their cultural conventions are more matriarchal, whereas the other society, on the other side of the mountains, where some of our other characters are, Dorina, they are like matriarchal to the same extent that like medieval Europe was patriarchal, or maybe even a little bit further. Like men in this culture have no rights at all. They're basically property. Men who are incapable of siring children are killed. They're like sacrificed to a god, and then the men that are capable of siring children are married off and become like property of their wives. And also gender in this other society in this setting does not appear to be fluid at all. It's all just based on sex. So that's really interesting. Those two cultures have like two very different versions of a matriarchy. So that's like really, really interesting world building comes from that. These two kingdoms they're currently at peace, but they've been at war in the past. And then there are some people who are ethnically Dai, but live in the Dorina kingdom, and they are mostly slaves. So we have that going on as well. One of our main POV characters, probably the least likable main character, is a general in the army of Dorina, and she has been tasked with committing a genocide against the Dai. And the reason for this, which this is, I guess, gets into a spoiler for like a kind of a major plot point, but again, a major plot point in the first 100 pages that you could probably have spoiled just by looking up a synopsis online, is that there's a parallel universe that's like colliding with this universe. The people in that universe are trying to invade, but you cannot cross over from one universe to another until your copy in the other universe is dead. So she has been tasked with wiping out all of the ethnically Dai people in the Dorina kingdom so that their copies in the parallel universe can cross over. Because her empress has allied herself with the parallel universe people who want to invade. One second, I'm gonna close my window. I opened it up to get some fresh air, but it's really cold outside. So that's going on. And then I guess I'll get into talking about the magic system because it also kind of relates to the parallel universe thing. So there's these four different like stars or constellations in the sky, and if you are capable of using magic, which the majority of the people in the setting are not, but some people are, your ability to use magic is tied to one of these four satellites is what they're referred to. And it's not really clear, or at least wasn't clear to me reading this, if they're like single stars or if they're a constellation, but depending on which one is ascendant in the sky, that's the people whose magic is going to be more powerful at that particular time. And there's three of them that are usually like just cycling through, but there's one of them that comes like every, I don't remember if it said exactly how long, but I don't know, maybe once every 50 years or something. And when that fourth one is ascendant, first of all, the power of the magic users tied to that one seems to be much greater than everybody else. They only have that power when it's like almost about to ascend, which is what's going on in the book, or when it's fully ascended. But when they have it, they are much more powerful than any of the other magic users. And also, when that one's ascendant is when the different universes are able to collide and people can cross over if their copy on the other side is dead. So that's kind of all starting to go on in this first book of the trilogy. This fourth satellite called Oma is which is kind of, I'm glad this didn't distract me too much while reading it, but I wonder, I don't know if this book has been translated into German, but I wonder if they changed that name because like that's the German word for grandma, and I don't know, that's kind of funny. Like grandma is rising up into the sky and giving everybody magical powers and making universes collide. But anyways, so that's like it's starting to come up, but it's not fully in the sky. There's a different one of the other three, I forget which one, but one of the other three is still ascendant, and those magic users have a lot of power. But Oma is starting to rise. The universes are close enough that people can cross over if they are a magic user associated with Oma, they're able to create a portal. But again, you can only pass through that portal if your copy on the other side is dead. So our main characters that we follow, we have the general in Dorana, who her empress is tasking her with committing a genocide so that the invaders from the other universe can come. She slowly figures that out, and then I won't spoil what she does from there. Another character we have is the new ruler of the Dai Kingdom, and he's kind of dealing with political controversy and like people wanting to rebel against him, because traditionally they have a female ruler, and again, it's not as like legally set in stone matriarchal as the Dorana Kingdom, but it is like matriarchal by convention, so it's weird to have a male ruler, and he's dealing with some political consequences from that. He's also slowly figuring out that this other universe is colliding and people are trying to cross over and invade. And then our two other big POV characters are two like teenagers from his court. One of whom is able to channel the power of the fourth satellite, Oma, and is like slowly figuring out how to use that, and she goes on various adventures that I won't spoil. And then another young person from his court is like capable of seeing through some of the magic that people can use magic to conceal themselves, and he's able to see through it, so he's very valuable for that reason. He gets sent on a mission to the northern continent, Saiduan, because Saiduan is currently bearing the brunt of this invasion from the other universe. He gets sent there to kind of try to research that, figure out what's going on, and hopefully bring back some information to the Dai that can help shore up their defenses. So those are our four main characters. We've got the two teenage characters, teenage or like young adult. I don't know if their ages are ever mentioned, but they're written sort of as children, and they were both like seemed like they were young people in the court. And then we have the general from Dorana. Again, not a very likable character, but I don't think that's the point of her character. Like she's just kind of our window into this like very violently matriarchal society. And you know, she is like carrying out this genocide, but then she slowly figures out like, oh, the reason I'm being told to do this is so that like an army from another universe can invade. And then we have the new ruler of the Dai Kingdom. And those stories kind of slowly come together at the end. Some of them start out together and branch out, and then they all come back together at the end. It's handled really well. It was, I don't know, at times it was somewhat hard to follow, but everything made sense at the end. And I think that's the important part. You know, I'm a big fan of Steven Erikson. I'm working my way through the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and what I've learned from reading those is that sometimes with a really big, really complicated fantasy novel, especially from an author who likes to do some really in-depth world building and have a lot of different characters from different cultures, you're not going to understand everything. As long as you mostly understand it at the end, and as long as you had fun along the way, that's what's important. So if you're someone who likes to really like if you're like someone who when you were reading Lord of the Rings, you're like going back and checking the appendices with like the family trees of the elves, you know, which I was one of those people. This can be a bit of an adjustment. You're not going to understand everything on your first time through. but you'll get what's going on by the end. Um, I did really enjoy it. There were times in the middle where I was starting to get frustrated, starting to feel like a little lost and confused, but I mean, like I said, it comes together at the end, and by the end of it, like by the time I got into the last 100 pages, I was like for sure planning to read the second and third book of this trilogy, which I will be doing. I don't know, at some point. I've got so much on the pile of books that I want to read in the next year. Um, so I don't know when, but at some point I will finish this trilogy. And then I know this author mostly does sci-fi. Cameron Hurley's got a couple different sci-fi series that I've heard good things about. So I might be checking out more from her as well. Um, but yeah, I mean this review I kind of just mostly talked about the setting and the world building, but I mean that's maybe the most interesting parts of this. Um, in terms of the I think that's probably what's most going to appeal to people about this book. If all of that sounded interesting, I think you'll like the book, and I would recommend it. Um, yeah, I guess that's all I have to say for now. I will probably revisit some of these ideas if I review the second and third book of the trilogy. Um, but yeah, just really interesting way of handling a parallel universe story. Really interesting magic system. I guess I didn't get into a whole lot of the actual abilities that they get from the four different satellites. Um, so I could briefly touch on that. The A lot of it seems like they and I can't. This is one thing that I struggled with following is keeping the like Oma is its own thing, but keeping the other three separate and understanding the different powers for the other three was something I struggled with at sometimes reading this. Um, but so I don't know which one is tied to which satellite, but some of the powers are like making these magical weapons that are like bound to the user. They're referred to in the book as infused weapons because they're infused with the power of one of the satellites, and it's like if you drop it and somebody else who is not the person it was tied to tries to use it, it'll like burn their skin. There's stuff with like um, people are able to like do healing magic, and I think the healing magic one was also tied to like plants. Um, oh, one really cool thing. This is not really plot and not really related to the magic I was just talking about, but just a cool aspect of the world building in this book is they have like giant dogs and giant bears and giant cats, which the dogs and the bears are used as mounts. I don't think horses are ever mentioned in the book, so I guess that's what they have instead of horses. Um, and then there's also really briefly at the end of the book, and I won't spoil how exactly they come in or what they do, but there's also cats that are the size of a horse. So we have dogs the size of a horse that are kind of used how horses would be in our world. We have bears that people are able to train and ride and are kind of like war horses. And then there's also some cats that are like up to a person's shoulder. So that was really cool imagery. Um, and yeah, I think with fantasy it can get really easy to just rely on a bunch of different tropes. So I love when there's a fantasy setting that's really, really weird. And this scratches that itch. Um, I can't believe I've talked for almost 20 minutes, and it was really just about the world building. I barely got to the plot, but um, yeah, I mean it's just I think what appealed to me most about the plot is this feeling of like impending chaos, like impending doom. There's all this stuff going on. The fourth satellite is rising, the universes are colliding. Like there's some sort of big disaster is about to happen, and everybody kind of feels it, and there's all these different plot threads of how different people are dealing with that. Um, and it's maybe part of why I'm so eager to read the next two books is that honestly, not a whole lot of it is resolved. Um, like some individual characters have arcs that are resolved, but the actual like impending catastrophe is not resolved at all. Um, so that's maybe a warning if you're if you're looking to read the first book and you're not sure you're committed to the second and third one, then you are not really going to get satisfying answers to all of your questions about the different universes colliding. Um, but there are satisfying ends to the arcs of individual characters, for the most part. So that's not a concern. Um, yeah, so I guess that's all my thoughts on The Mirror Empire by Kameron Hurley. This came out in 2014, so it's almost a decade old. It had been on my to read list for a couple years. I finally got around to it this year, and I will maybe soon, but definitely at some point be reading the second and third book of this trilogy, and maybe some of the sci-fi books by Kameron Hurley as well. She has one called The Light Brigade that I've heard is pretty good, so that's on my radar now. Um, yeah, so this is it's December 30th, so this is definitely my last book finished of 2023, my last review of 2023. In 2024, I'm going to try to finish a bunch of stuff that's like half done that I've been reading this year, and then I need to get back into reading some Russian classics, and I'm also going to start diving into Bengali classics. I've got a bunch of them on my shelf and a bunch more that I've been meaning to buy, so that's kind of one of my next projects. I'll read some fantasy and sci-fi as well, though, and all of that stuff will be on my YouTube channel in 2024.